Yeah. Good morning. I think we will start our panel. My name is Wendelin von Bredow. I'm the Deputy Europe Editor of The Economist, and I also look after Eastern and Central Europe for The Economist. And I'm very happy to be moderating this panel. We will talk about the changing role of the media. And I'd almost rephrase it and ask, is the role of the media changing with all the advancements in technology and everything else that's happening? I've got a wonderful panel with me. To my left, there's Ingrid Deltenre, I hope I pronounce it correctly, who is the head of the European Broadcasting Union and has been involved in media all her life. To my right, I have Marites Wituk from the Philippines. She is a journalist and editor of Rappler, an online news site. Then one further down is Valerio Nicolai, who is based in Bucharest and is involved with a foundation in the ghetto of Bucharest. And last but certainly not least, there's Jeffrey Gedmin, who used to run Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty and is now in London heading the Legatum Institute, a think tank. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to my panelists, and I think each one will speak for up to 10 minutes with a few introductory remarks. And then I think we should proceed to have questions and answers and a hopefully lively discussion with all of you. So maybe Ingrid, you may want to make a start.
Thank you very much. Well, good morning, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for having me here, for being here in this fantastic room. It's very impressive, I must say. And I'm looking forward to an interesting discussion, and I hope I will sometime surprise you a little bit. Well, first of all, I'm also very grateful to Wendelin, who has already rephrased the topic of today's meeting, the changing role of media, or is the role really changing? I'm not going to state the obvious, I hope, but journalist institutions play a crucial role for working, functioning democracies. You all know that. That was the case in the past. That's the case for today, and I'm sure it will be in the future. The more information is available, the easier it is to get it disseminated, the more crucial becomes the role of the media, I even believe. Because not everything is true what is in the internet. And so the need for analysis, for context, for in-depth information, for gathering what is really relevant and what is priority, I think this is something that is not going to change, and it will stay in the future as it is of today, a crucial role of the media. But it's not the only thing. I think in times where inequalities are rising, in times where the marketization is increasing, in times where people of affluence and people with modest means live increasingly different lives, work and shop in different areas, in times where they stay in their social networks and communities in the internet to stay amongst themselves. I think in these times, and I say these developments are not good for democracies, media matter. Media provide a public space where people are sharing emotions, participate in debates, participate in big sports events, like, for example, now in the Olympic Games, where a lot of, I must say, reflections, emotions, ideas are spread, where people are confronted maybe with other people they wouldn't meet, where people are confronted with ideas they wouldn't meet when they stay in their social networks. That's the place where people meet other people with different backgrounds. But when I say this role is staying the same, I'm not saying that everything remains as it is of today. No doubt technology has formed and changed this public space, and no doubt that the commercialization has an impact as well. Let's start with technology first. Digitalization, internet. The internet now is 20 years old. 2.2 billion people have access, are connected. The more and more through mobile phones, devices, but also through their PCs, and still a small fraction, but increasing through their tablets. 2.2 billion, that means 1/3 of the world population. 2/3 of the world population is still to go. Technology has changed the way we produce news, we produce our programs. Technology has changed what is offered in the daily news bulletins. Technology has changed how we access the news. You know that. But technology has not changed what our needs are and why we use media. If you look what people is doing online or also in the internet or also on TV or radio, they listen to music, they watch videos, they communicate with their friends, they share what they want to see. They have been informed, they're entertained, and they want to be surprised. These basic needs, they don't change, but the way how they are served, this is going to change and has already changed. So internet has an impact on how we come and how we get to the information, and it has changed the availability of information. But it is still the classical media that makes news relevant, makes news to become trusted. But I come to this a little bit later. The internet has also, and that is the second part from the technology, has another impact, and that is the impact on business models. And I really want to focus a little bit on the business models as well. You are all aware that Newsweek is going to stop its printed edition. I'm very happy that that is not going to happen to The Economist. But what you see with Newsweek that will stop their printed edition, this is just one symptom, and I'm sure you have examples in your countries where you are living. Why is this happening? If you look at the internet, if you look at the companies that are active in the internet world, if you look at the Apples, the Googles, the Facebooks, the Amazons, today these companies are worth 3 times more than the existing old media companies, the networks like CBS and Universal Studios. If you look at the ad spend, about the main contributor to the content, if you look what happens there, it's still TV that is #1. Online content is at the 2nd place with 20%, and then comes print. If you look at Google, you see that Google has probably some 50% of the ad revenues that is today available for the online world. That is why Google is so, let's say, successful, but also so attractive, and that is why Google could basically do much more than they do today, since they have full boxes of money. But if you look what happens to the newspaper industry, if you look at their revenues, you see that their ad revenues are today at the level of the 1950s. The 1950s. It is going down in a tremendous speed. And it is today the newspapers, and it can be tomorrow the television stations. So that is why the internet has not only the positive impact of having an increased availability of information, of news, of blogs, of websites, of course, of tweets we can follow. It has also an influence on how we deal with the availability of the information, but even bigger is the impact on the business models of the media. Because if you are not strongly financed, if you are not, let's say, having a sustainable business model, you will simply not be able to continue the role to play that you have played in the past. And that is why the technology is changing and having an impact on the media industries. And that can be sometimes worrying. And that is, and please forgive me, but I'm representing the European Broadcasting Union here. This is basically a union where we unite basically public service media. Public service media financed by license fee, by advertisement, by mixed models, or by state grants. And I think this is the reason why especially also public service media in the TV industry matter a lot. Because when you look what travels fast, what is exploited on an international level and which will work in the future as well, like music, like fiction, like documentaries, this is something that works the more and more on a globalized level. But if you look at the news, at culture, if you look at sometimes entertainment and even sports, this is still a national good. And to provide here a distinctive, relevant program, you need to be sustainably financed. So the business models to actually provide what we want media to provide, they play a crucial role, and this is going to change. And this is why I think that public service media matter today and will matter even more tomorrow. I come almost to the end. Why do I think that this kind of media needs also protection by, for example, a special finance model like license fee, for example? I think that information, I think that culture are goods that are not comparable with apples and pears. And this is the basic reason why I think we should think about what kind of a democracy do we want to live in, what kind of media do we need. I think this is the basic foundation for having a special regulation with regard to media. And I think also this comes with a special responsibility for media. And this all, I think this special market interference is also because I think you can't buy everything with Czech crowns, with dollars and euros and other currencies. I think there is something which is even more important, that is trust, as we have also heard in the meeting before. I think it's trust, and to be a trusted, reliable medium that plays a critical and crucial role in democracies, you need to have a business model that works also in the future. And if that's not possible, you need a special framework and a special protection. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ingrid. Thank you, Ingrid, for the very interesting introductory remarks. And I think we'll move to my right, to Marie-Thèse. Good
afternoon. Can I be heard? Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be repeating some of the points you raised. So for all the exciting technological changes sweeping the media today, I take the view that the role of the media remains constant: to keep the public informed, to make them aware of issues and the context in which these happen, and to illuminate the national conversation. Taking off from Václav Havel's example, journalists should continue to speak without fear or favor, shake lazy assumptions, question convenient labels, puncture the hype. Our goal is to provide deeper understanding in as fair a manner as possible, and we should be perceived to be trustworthy. What is changing is the way we perform our role. There are new demands, new pressures that affect the way we do journalism. I've been a journalist for more than 30 years, and it feels like 100 years, especially when I see the young reporters today doing their work, and I don't envy them. What they do requires a lot of energy. For example, some of the young reporters covering today's event, they do multiple tasks. Every minute is a deadline. First, they tweet highlights of this panel. In between, they do video interviews using their iPhones. Then they write short reports to break the news and file these reports. Later, they update the reports to include more details and the context and file it with the video interviews. This is because a news website is a hungry beast. It needs to upload fresh reports, both written and in video, several times a day. If not, it will be a vast and eternal empty space. Sometimes, in the rush to beat the competition, we get it wrong. But as one opinion writer said, the slogan today is, and I quote, "Never wrong for long," because the story is corrected as soon as the mistake is discovered. Work never stops, as these reports are shared on social media, particularly Twitter and Facebook. and feedback is monitored, and if these responses are worthy of attention, these are made into stories as well and uploaded. The cycle continues. Some of my colleagues call this journalism, because journalists keep churning out stuff like an assembly line product. For my part, I can now tell stories and share my opinions in various ways. Today, I write blogs, and I do video blogs as well for our website. I share these on Facebook, and others share them on Twitter. This is a far cry from what I did in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, when I would simply write the news reports and analysis for my newspaper. Deadlines were fixed every afternoon of every single day, and I enjoyed the luxury of time. There is a downside to this technological revolution. Undoubtedly, internet is useful. It provides us access to an infinite amount of information. But as one author, Nicholas Carr, wrote in his book, The Shallows, and I quote, "Once I was a scuba diver in a sea of words. Now I zip along the surface like a guy on a jet ski," end of quote. He argues that we are now consigned to the intellectual shallows, but these shallows are as wide as a vast ocean. Attention span tends to be short. People rush to comment without thoroughly reading the posts, and sometimes this leads into mob think. Given the fragmentation of news on the internet, on cable TV, and fragmented audiences, we tend to choose to listen to only our side of the conversation or our side of the argument and believe only our side of the story. We do not like to leave our comfort zones. Today, there's pressure on news websites to attract traffic, so sometimes the number of hits and page views makes editors go for the news that sells, the popular stuff, at the expense of boring but important news. One American editor said that while these numbers tell them what the public likes to read, they always remember one thing: they are not American Idol. They are a news organization. So I still believe in the old media since they complement the new media. We live in the age of the hybrid, where professional and amateur journalists coexist to bring the news, especially in times of emergencies, disasters, and in authoritarian regimes. What gives journalists value is our sense of civic duty, that we sort the daily garbage, ferret out the lies and the half-truths, and tell a story straight, unvarnished. Media organizations today face several challenges. For the new media, foremost is finding a business model that will make online newsrooms sustainable so that they are able to do good journalism, to report breaking news as well as in-depth stories. Can advertising alone pay for the costs? Should online newsrooms charge for some of their content? Should they partner with universities so that the latter subsidize the cost? This is starting to happen in parts of the US. Or should foundations come in and help? For newspapers, the challenge is to keep their readers, many of whom are shifting to online news, which they get for free. Today, newspaper reporting should go beyond what is reported in the websites. Speed is what the online newsrooms have. Depth and context are what newspapers should offer. That is their value. This means that reporters should be mature and highly skilled. To conclude, media continue to perform their long-standing role of informing the public and shedding light on issues of public interest. It is the way the media fulfill this role that is changing, faced with new technology and new demands. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Marie-Thèse. I think we'll continue with Valerio. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have to start with a confession. My views are warped by the fact that I am a Roma or a Gypsy, and by the fact that for the last 4 years I spend most of my time in a ghetto in Bucharest, which is full of problems, full of criminality, full of drugs, of prostitution, and so on. And my views are also irreverent, because I think we need irreverence. We need to call on ministers who sleep in the meeting, and we need to call on media who is racist, and so on and so forth. So I think at this moment, I will talk practically about media in Romania. That's my expertise. I do not know much about media anywhere else. Maybe I know a bit about media in the United States and Canada, but my points are about media in Romania. I think that the main role of media at this moment in Romania is towards creating a collective paranoia. And I will give you the symptoms of collective paranoia. So those symptoms are suspicions towards the others, development of different conspiracy theories to justify an imaginary construct of identity, and increased tendency towards aggression and unforgiveness, a very poor capacity for critical introspection, and as a bonus, no sense of humor. And what I see is exactly that. And I will give you a number of examples. So first example which I give you about the suspicion towards the others is this. The Gypsies are coming like wolves. They are multiplying like sheep. The first to leave will be international companies. There won't be anyone to sell their new shit to, and they will move away to somewhere with less gypsies and more money. Who's going to buy soap for soft and tender white skin? Dirty jeepers? The difference between gypsies and cattle is that cattle are subject to veterinary control. Livestock can behave like gypsies, but the reverse is allowed. Bovine rights and freedom have been under serious pressure for years, and during that time the gypsy women have given birth to twins again, and she's as bloody-minded as a cow yet again. This is written by a Bulgarian journalist who won a prize for the best journalist in Bulgaria. I have another one which is coming from a very respectable journal in Romania, which is Gypsies, those disgusting beings with filthy and lewd women dragging their broods that shit on themselves, a living proof we come from monkeys, hysterical, cunning, treacherous, or societal abortion. Those gypsies multiply like rabbits, my apology to rabbits, only to get their stinky, dirty paws on the welfare of some poor children. The gypsies steal, they are rapists, and so on and so forth. I can give you practically tens of examples like this from media all around Europe, including Czech Republic. But this is not my main point. My main point is that I think somehow media needs to help us get out of this collective paranoia. It needs to become something else that it is now. I agree, internet has a huge impact, a huge positive impact on Europeans in general, and on European media and mass media in general. But at the same time, it has a huge impact in spreading racism. The amount of racism on the internet is absolutely incredible. I do agree we need to have, I'm a million in my formation. I think every opinion needs to be heard. But at the same time, we need to take in consideration that internet doesn't bring only good things. It brings lots of bad things, and we need to deal with those. Incentives for the media at this moment, at least in Romania, are profit. Journalists are very cheap to be bought. Corruption is a major issue, and it's almost impossible to address. And I will give you an example. For instance, you receive European funds. European funds are most of the time corrupted, because powerful politicians use those funds. To write about European funds, it's against your is no incentive because European funds are paying most of the advertisement in the newspaper in Romania. So if you write against it, you don't have a job anymore. It's the same with lots of other things which I hope we will discuss. I am also quite appalled by the fact that I see lots of journalists on lots of mass media outlets in Romania who are very keen to judge other people, to give lessons of morals, to say that they are incorruptible and so on, while they are paid by people who are profoundly corrupt. While, you know, their media outlets promote prostitution, they promote immorality. So there is a huge disbalance here which just accentuates this paranoia. And I will end with something which I very much liked from Havel. Havel was saying that intellectuals have a very important role. Intellectuals have the role to talk about horrors and threats to our democracies, to our societies. And politicians need to listen and act. What happens at this moment, I see more and more mass media being preoccupied to listen to the opinions of politicians about the horrors and the threats to come. And less people care about acting. Hopefully, we'll be able to change that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valerio, for perspective from Romania. Now, Jeffrey, over to you.
Well, thank you. A pleasure and good afternoon. It's bad being last when the first are so good. I'm going to mostly echo the comments and maybe say some of the same things in a little bit of a different way. As you've heard, I was at one time president of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty from 2007 to 2011. And it's great to be back in Prague, and it's wonderful to see colleagues from RFERL. One of the services we operated, and the company still does operate, is broadcast for Uzbekistan, which is arguably the most severe of the Central Asian dictatorships. And I recall once traveling with colleagues to visit our associates in Tashkent and having a kind of offline meeting with some young Uzbeks who told me that they listened to us, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty in Uzbekistan. And I just wanted to hear and learn what we were doing well, what we were doing less well, how we can improve. And these young students were snickering a little bit or giggling a little bit. I didn't know it was so funny. And so as the conversation proceeded through an interpreter, I just wanted to know what was so amusing to them. And it revealed itself in due course that they thought that RFERL Uzbek service was really CIA radio. And I thought that was pretty exciting too, because my job became more interesting and more intriguing suddenly. And as we pushed the conversation forward, I said to them, no, you tell me you listen, and you tell me your friends listen, and your faithful followers, but if you think it's CIA radio, why? What is the appeal? What is the attraction? And they all said in unison, well, when you follow the news, it turns out time and again to be accurate and reliable and trustworthy. So why do we care if it comes from the CIA, as long as it's truthful and it bears itself out as honest and reliable? I guess I tell you the story for two reasons, and you've heard this from my co-panelists this afternoon. First of all, in any kind of respectable, legitimate, effective media enterprise, or to talk about media and journalism, credibility is central. I think it's the beginning and end of everything. It is if I may say, as someone said once, it's a little bit like virginity. Once you lose it, it's gone forever. Credibility is absolutely central. Second of all, the very topic of the conference, which is so much in keeping with the spirit of the great Václav Havel, media and democracy. Well, how integral are those two parts? I now run an institute in London called the Legatum Institute. We publish something called the Prosperity Index, which is an inquiry into what we call wealth and well-being in 140-some countries around the world. So not just economic growth, but also social capital and education and how you can think about and in some modest way measure developments in civil society. It's not an engineering problem, the path to prosperity. It's not deterministically concluded or formulaically guided, but there are certain truths. And I cannot think of any country in today's world or historically where without a free competitive press, you had decent, accountable government, and without free media, you had a healthy and prospering and flourishing civil society. In that vein, for my part, three very brief observations to the subject at hand today. The first is, and you've heard this, so I echo the sentiment of my colleagues here, we do live in an era of truly unprecedented freedom and opportunity and inclusion as a result of globalization the last 20 years and as a consequence of technological advance in the last 20 years. It is amazing. It brings remarkable opportunities, but I'd like to point out that it brings remarkable challenges and burdens too. We heard Karl Schwarzenberg say this morning that technology is not intelligence and wisdom, and it's surely not. And we realize that with the good news that there's more competition, there's more choice than ever before. The old monopolies, not The Economist magazine, the old monopolies are being challenged and in some instances closed, and rightfully so, that there's a burden of responsibility. Opportunity brings with it responsibility. I was taken by the remarks from His Holiness the Dalai Lama, both on the screen this morning, but also in the printed material for the conference, where His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, before we start talking about mechanisms and regulations and institutions, the first thing we have to talk about is individual responsibility. I think that's quite in peace with the life and work of Václav Havel, and it's certainly in peace with the life and work of the Dalai Lama. In fact, so much so, if I may say, that I've had to apologize to conference organizers that I can't stay for the rest of the conference today because we are hosting the Dalai Lama at the Legatum Institute tomorrow in London to talk not about media and responsibility, but economics and the future of capitalism and the role of the individual and responsibility. So I think the first point is globalization, interdependence, inclusion, democratization, more voices than ever before, more access and opportunity, but responsibility has to come with it. And I fear in too many instances we have now a surplus of opportunity and a deficit of responsibility. The second point, you know this, and I suppose it's stating the obvious. With the advent of new technologies, freedom fighters, I see Martin Butra here, a number of friends from a number of countries, from Belarus to Burma. Freedom fighters have means at their disposal like never before to communicate, to connect, and advance democratic ideals. What a revolutionary change. What considerable positive effect. But I remind you that while it's a tool for freedom fighters, we know more and more in recent years that it's a weapon for others as well. I commend you to the work of Chris Walker, who's somewhere here today, formerly from Freedom House and now the National Endowment for Democracy, who's done a lot of intelligent work on how dictatorships love new technology and social media too. And you have leaders like Iran and Russia and China, authoritarian regimes, all of them in various variety, who are becoming terribly sophisticated. I always used to say, we've got colleagues from Radio Free Europe's Radio Farda, the Persian service, and they'll know what I'm talking about. The Green Movement in Iran loves Facebook, and so does the regime. And they use it in the most clever and shrewd and ruthless fashion. The last point I want to make has something to do with journalism itself, with communication, with network, with exchange of information, with what we all love and applaud, the free flow of information, ideas. I think we're apt to forget at times that friends and fans and followers and even citizen journalism thus far is not really journalism yet. And I'm, too, signing up to this idea of the virtues of old-fashioned journalism. That's my words, not yours. There's an article in the new issue of the Journal of Democracy by Mark Plattner on this very important issue, media and democracy. Mark draws this out a little bit. There's still a demand, there's still a need for news gathering, news reporting, news analysis, intelligent and responsible comment. And how do you get that? Well, I don't know how you get it without good old-fashioned things like training, standards, supervision, and accountability. And the anonymity and the freedom that's provided by social media, new technologies, sometimes discourages restraint and responsibility. I'll leave you with this thought on that note. I was in Starbucks this morning grabbing something before coming over here, and was looking for something to eat, and anything there in the Starbucks, like any place in a grocery store, any place in a market, or any place in a shop where today you buy any kind of food, if you grab it, even a croissant, you know, there's a label there, right? And on that label you can find out who produced it, where it was produced, when it was produced, and then all the ingredients, right? 10, 50, you never knew that so many things went into a croissant, or probably shouldn't go into a croissant at Starbucks. There's a telephone number if you want to learn more. There's an email address if you want to learn more. And it strikes me that in this era where opportunity requires more responsibility, it's not just the responsibility of those of us who provide the journalism or deliver the content, it's also the responsibility of the consumer. We're consumers too. And it comes to my mind that we're in an era where we've become incredibly demanding and discriminating about everything that we use to feed our bodies. We want to know every last detail reliably, but I think as consumers, when it comes to what we use to nourish our minds, we don't ask as many questions about where it comes from, who produced it, what their motive is, or bias, or conflict of interest. And I think that's the other side of the responsibility coin. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you for your very interesting introductory remarks. And I thought we could maybe pick up on 4 points, specifically in our discussion, although of course you can ask our panelists whatever you like. But I thought one point Ingrid raised when she talked about the fact that the availability of news has changed, but not the role of the media. And I think that's a very interesting thought, that actually the role of the media has, in all the tectonic changes that we are going through, the fundamental role of the media has actually not changed. I thought that's a very interesting thought. And then Marit has talked about superficiality in a way, and how today we zip along the surface of the ocean of information rather than scuba diving. And I think there's a danger just because there's so much out there. And I thought we could maybe talk about that a little bit. Then I thought Valerio very interesting in what he said about the dangers of the internet. And, you know, so should there be some kind of censorship? Should we restrain, you know, should we protect our children or other citizens when it comes to racism? How should we deal with that? And finally, and in a way related to this point, is Jeffrey's Jeffrey talking about opportunity but also responsibility, and that to some extent it's our responsibility what we consume and how we consume the masses of information available to us these days. So with these 4 points, I'd love to open the floor to your questions. And maybe you could also specify, if your question is specifically directed to one of the panelists, you could say who it is. Thank you. Okay, there's a lady here.
Thank you. Gwen Dillard from the Voice of America. And I'd like to add one more point to your list of 4, if I can. Several of the panelists made reference to a business model that's needed to help digital media, private digital media, succeed. And I wonder if that isn't one of the things that has changed about the media, that it now needs to be viable in an economic sense in the private market. Jeffrey Gedman made a reference to the free flow of information, and I think what we've seen is that the free flow of information is not free. So when we talk about free media in the past, up until now, we've meant media that's free largely from state interference or control. But how free is the media if the media is now enslaved to advertising revenue? And if everything that they cover has to be monetized, and if people have to be willing to buy the product that they're producing. You talked about leaving in-depth coverage to newspapers. Another newspaper goes out of business almost every week.
I know.
Van der Leyen has said The Economist has not yet gone out of business. I tend to think you're not far behind. But what does this mean for media if in fact it has to be so saleable?
Yeah, it's a very good question about the commercial pressures, and I think probably Ingrid is very well suited to reply, as she's been on the managerial side of running the media.
It's an extremely difficult question you are raising and very complex to answer. It's not easy, and I try to just focus on a couple of points. First of all, I think you're right. Information is not free. It has never been free. Second, as we all can see, the technology has an impact. And it's quite disruptive. And it is disruptive if you look at the traditional, and I'm not sure if you are focusing only on newspapers or if it is media in general, but if you look at the newspapers, you see clearly that almost all newspapers struggle. I must say, with 2 or 3 exceptions. One is The Economist, one is probably the International Herald Tribune, and there might be the Financial Times that is doing quite well as well, but almost everybody else is struggling. The readership goes down, subscriptions are going down, ad revenues are as low as in the 50s. So this shows that the business model is under threat. And sitting here, and I've worked long years for newspapers, I was always saying, come stop with all those predictions. But sitting now here, I'm not sure if most of the newspapers will have still a printed edition in 20 years from now. I'm not sure, I wouldn't say. But I see also that the new electronic forms, they also produce the newspapers, they provide very valuable services, and they can work on a completely different business model or in a completely different cost structure. When I look at the Huffington Post, they started with basically aggregating news coming from everywhere. And now just recently they won a Pulitzer Prize. They could do it. Don't ask me exactly how all the financial flows flow, because I have no complete transparency and I'm not prepared to this question. But the fact is that if you start a business on online only, you have a different cost structure. You don't need as many journalists as you do. You don't need to print it, and you don't need to distribute it in the classical way. So your cost structure is completely different. And still you can provide valuable services if they are really good, if they are in-depth, if they're not superficial, if they're relevant. And then I see, just looking myself, I'm absolutely ready to pay for it. If it is really more than just news. If it is news, it is something like, I would say it's a commodity. But as soon as you add value, I think people is ready to pay for it. So there will be new business models, and there will also be new advertisers that like the way of presenting their ad, let's say, on an iPad instead of a printed newspaper. So I'm not pessimistic that this kind of in-depth information won't exist. I think it will exist in 20 years, but I don't think that it will be distributed in the way as it is of today. And I think there will be new business models, and the dissemination of the iPad shows that various newspapers, such as the Financial Times, all of a sudden set themselves objectives when it comes to digital revenues, which was never an objective for a newspaper before, but all of a sudden they set themselves objectives, and they see that they're actually able to sell a new form of subscription. And the people, let's say, well, mostly it's a specific type of person that is also interested in more in-depth information. They're really ready to pay for it, having only the online version. So I'm not, again, not pessimistic, but I think that the technology will change the business models and will lead to a new form of newspaper, which is new compared to today's standards. Probably working with a lot more external experts, working with a lot more, with a much bigger network than they do as of today, and with different, let's say, with different relations to their experts that contribute to their sides, which are not the classical journalists anymore as of today. So I'm always an optimistic person. For TV, it's not so different. I think also television will go through quite a change because a lot of programming like the international sports, like fiction, like documentaries, Discovery Today, Discovery Channel, producing one of the best documentaries in the world, they have their own channels. They will stop sooner or later to sell the documentaries because they say, let's exploit it ourselves. So classical television is going to change. There will be more live. I hope there will still be as much as news and current affairs as of today, but it will be very local. And I think everything else will be probably, let's say, distributed through other means. Again, apps. You see already today, people are longer working with apps than on portals. So it will change the way television is going to offer their programs. And to be able to offer an interesting program, you need, this is the very expensive thing, more expensive than just, let's say, text. I think there the business model becomes probably even more crucial. And that's why I think that public service media, having their special way of financing, play such an important role in Europe as well, and need to be protected if we really want to maintain a strong, independent, impartial, but also distinctive TV program that has a huge impact on the perception of the people of the world, being able really to deliver valuable, good programming and not just, let's say, copying what you see a little bit everywhere else. I'm not sure if I have answered your question.
I think you give a very good answer, and it's sort of impossible. It's a little bit like looking in the crystal ball, but we are all, I mean, including the economists, of course, not only thinking about it, but doing something actively about it, because we feel, you know, if we don't, we don't really have a future. I mean, it's absolutely tectonic shifts that our industry is going through, and I think in 20 years, as you said, it'll look very different, and there will be probably very few printed magazines or indeed newspapers. So it's a big change. Do we have another question? Yeah, there's a gentleman here in the middle.
Hello, this panel is about changing role of the media. So I have a question. Last, maybe from the lady from Switzerland. Last year, I was in June in Switzerland, in St. Moritz, and there was meeting of the Bilderberg Group. This is group where are coming the most influential politics and businessmen, and I was there, and there was only one big TV. It was Russia Today, and only one local Swiss TV, and that was all from the mainstream media. So this is one example of the events which are totally censored by the mainstream media in all over the world, including our media. So don't you think that this is the sign that the role of the media changed this way, that all mainstream media in the world became just the tool of the most influential groups in the world. And in fact, I would like to ask you, why are you participating on this? Because if you wouldn't sit here. Thank you.
Oops, again. I think probably I would say the media being an elitist group serving some few elites. That was probably true 100 years ago, it was probably true 50 years ago, it was probably true 20 years ago. But I think this has fundamentally changed. I don't think that the media serve some elites only. I really truly believe that the media serve the audiences. The fact that there were 2 TV stations at this special conference where everybody was saying secrecy, we're not communicating what we're talking here, the fact that there were TV stations, the fact that there was a huge internet community made it possible that this Bilderberg conference, which takes place every year, I think since many, many years, for the first time has published their agendas and has also published their minutes. That was for the first time. So I think it has an impact and something is changing here. And I think that the role of the media in holding responsible people accountable is probably today easier and better done than ever before. I'm not saying that every media organization is doing it in the same very well way, but when you look, for example, at corruption indexes, if you take the corruption index of The Economist and you take the freedom of the media, the freedom of expression index of the Freedom House, for example, and you bring them together, you see clearly that the bigger the media freedom is, the lower the corruption is. So there is an impact, and I think this impact has become even stronger thanks to the internet. It's difficult to hide. It's difficult that people wouldn't know about such a conference taking place this time in St. Moritz and next time somewhere else in the world. I think people know. And I think also all the rules that have been, let's say, launched when it comes to openness, when it comes to transparency, I think this is the result of an increasing mistrust of the audience. It's basically managing mistrust. That's why everybody has to communicate and be transparent about everything. So there is a big mistrust. I think the people mistrust almost every institution that is existing as of today. Every democracy, every politician, every media organization, every, let's say, church is today mistrusted. Why is this? I think people know more, they are better educated, they know more, they have more information, and they simply mistrust. So this leads to a lot of measures to actually manage the mistrust. And I think we are now in a situation where everything is being questioned, and I hope that we come in a time where trust becomes a value, and maybe also, and I'm not naive, but that we can have more trust again in some of the institutions, and that they have reason to be trusted.
Thank you for an excellent reply. Now, is there, there's a lady here. Is there a microphone? There's a lady just here in the second.
Hi there, my name's Susie Dennison. I'm from European Council on Foreign Relations. It's a foreign policy think tank. And I had a question for Mr. Nicolai in relation to your point about the increase of racism in newer media, but not only, also in the traditional media as well. And I wondered if you could say something about how you thought we could react to that, because I think that it's linked in, to some extent to the point which Mr. Gedmin raised about us as consumers and what we choose to read and access, and it's also, I think, linked as well to this question about the business models of different media outlets. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, Valeria, yeah.
Practically, I very much agree with you. So it is all about incentives, and I will give you the example. So in Romania, there were recently tens of thousands of people yelling death to gypsies, and we always hated the gypsies, and on the stadiums. We got UEFA through their communication system to react to it. Why UEFA reacted to it? Because there are enough Roma players, very good players, who they want to have play. At the same time, the European Commission, the Commissioner on Justice, Viviane Reding, didn't react at all. Why she didn't react? Because she reacted 2 years ago. It was a huge scandal with France, so she just shut it up at this moment. So if you have the right incentives for people, they will always react. What I think is missing at this moment, I think we are coming from a very elitist point of view. I mean, I'm sorry to contradict you, but we are not all interested in what we eat. I mean, yes, everybody here who speaks good English has a reasonable salary, they are. The majority of people in Romania couldn't care less what they eat. I mean, if you have McDonald's, which is 10 times cheaper than, I don't know what fancy restaurant which is organic, everybody will go to there. And I think it's the same, we think in the same pretty elitist way about media in general. We need to look at what are the incentives. Racism sells much better than theories about political correctness. So, of course, the journalist will care a lot more about his own salary than caring to educate people. And if we do not have the right incentives to push journalists to care about education, that will never work. That's my belief. So I think a solution to it will be to have something like The Guardian. I mean, a strong foundation which will pay people to write completely independently. And I think in Eastern Europe, that will work because you see people are completely fed up with corruption. So if you will have a media outlet which you know is completely independent and writes about corruption, slowly there will be more and more people buying into these media outlets. Unfortunately, up to this moment, the European Commission didn't move at all into that direction. Their funding is still irrelevant when it comes to serious media outlets all over Europe. So hopefully you and I and other people will put enough pressure on the Commission to support this type of initiatives. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your response. There's a lady here in the first row who has another question.
Hello?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the possibility to raise the question. I have two questions. Back to journalism and role of media. Coming from Slovakia, quite smaller country, where almost all the newspapers are in hands from the German companies. I'm all the time surprised. All our students of physics, mathematics, I don't know, sociology, psychology, they have a possibility to study abroad, not the journalists. Everybody has a chance to go for a training or to work with some people abroad, not the journalist. I don't know any journalist in Slovakia being, for example, 4 months in Economist or in Süddeutsche Zeitung, Neue Zürcher Zeitung, and so on. Our journalists are the most unexpected and untrained people we have, without any contact abroad, without being trained abroad. So this is the problem, because if we are speaking, going around the world, attending the conferences and so on, we are speaking with this kind of journalists, they don't understand us. Yes? And the second question is, we politicians, I am MP, all the part of our industry, economic life, everything is under the critical eye of the European Commission, European Union, watchdog organization, everybody, but not media. I didn't read, probably it was, that this media in Slovakia, they are in the hand of these people, and they will be under the critical meaning of the international journalist society or something, so that they are sharing not valid information or something so. There is no international critical society at all. So this is a problem I see for such a country like Slovakia. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think this was probably a bit more of a statement than a question, but an interesting one at that. Unless one of you would like to comment on these points, I think we will go to the next question. Is there anybody? There's somebody in the middle here.
Hello, I'm a student from Prague, and I would like to have a question. I think there's been a very interesting point raised about media and how it generates racism. But what I think is that racism is not people who are convinced by the arguments, by the simplistic arguments of racism. That doesn't stem from the mainstream media, but mainly from the social networks like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube videos, YouTube comments, where users post simplistic arguments, strong language, emotional pictures to convince people to believe in such ideas of racism. So, well, my point is that I don't think that mainstream media is causing racism, but mostly, social networks and pages as such. So, how would you react to that? Social networks have a great plus in having people, letting people to have free speech, and they enable them to give what they think and what they want. But on the other hand, there is the danger of general users. I don't think they are really critical thinking as much as we would want them to. And so they are easy prey for simplistic arguments and emotional language and pictures, which cause, I would say, negative beliefs. So,
thank you. I think maybe Marie-Thérèse, would you like to comment? In general, I would like you to ask questions rather than make a mini speech, so that would be very helpful. But maybe you'd like to take that question.
Hello, okay. Just a point on social media. What is happening in social media actually triggers news. It is not exactly news. Campaigns on social media are noticed by the mainstream or legacy media, and they pick it up as news. At least in the Philippines, because the Philippines is among the top 10 users of Facebook in the world. Number 6, I think, or number 8, despite the low internet penetration. Campaigns on social media, on Facebook or Twitter, are taken notice of by traditional media, and they land on TV and newspapers. So it's a source of news. But I agree that the arguments on Facebook, if you look at them, sometimes you just want to delete all of them. But I think that's a part of the tolerance, of the blossoming of so many ideas on the internet via social media. But again, you mentioned earlier about citizen journalists. There is valuable information sometimes given to the journalists from Facebook and from Twitter, and our duty is to vet this information before we use them on traditional or even write them as news.
Would you like to? You would like, okay, yeah.
All right. So, depends on the level of democracy, yeah? In Romania, Eastern Europe in general, maybe not in Czech Republic, because I don't see really Czech Republic as Eastern Europe, it's more like Central Europe. Mass media works on audiences. So in Romania, the best audience is made by two guys who are extremely radical and extremely racist. And they are invited to lots of mainstream media talks. They are the most present in mass media. So, I mean, agree with you, it's a problem with social networks, but it's not just there, it's also in mainstream media. But I'm all against trying to curtail that, because I do believe any type of opinion needs to be heard. And I do believe that we need debates. What we don't have enough people to debate in the other way. So we need to work there, and we need to get more people educated how to tackle racism. Not just to ban racism, because I don't think it will work. It will just explode, it will radicalize people more and more, and so on and so forth.
Thank you. There's a question there in the middle. There's a lady who's getting up.
Good afternoon. I'm a student from Prague also, but I want to ask you a question, not as a student, but as a citizen of not so democratic country, Ukraine. Mr. Gedmin raised the question about the dictators love new technologies too. And I want to ask you as a citizen, how should we, as society, see the difference between the state or corporate propaganda and the real news?
Would you like to, yeah?
Do you mean in countries like the Czech Republic and European countries, or just generally?
I mean the countries like Ukraine or Russia or Belarus, where civil societies are not so mature and not so adult.
Well, it's a great question. In developed democracies like the United States, I'm not so sure we're completely mature yet either, if you tune on to American television these days and some of what we read and watch. I think that, your question ties together a number of points that I've been noting the last few minutes. One is the need for monitoring in some way, and I wouldn't be instinctively a great fan of some international body of bureaucrats that takes it upon itself to monitor free media. But in the United States, we have lots of grassroots media watchdog groups that pop up everywhere, and they're just out there vigilant trying to fact check and keep people honest. And when they're not honest, people go after them to fact check them and keep them honest. That's the one thing. The second thing is, in transitional countries, developing world, or Ukraine or other countries, it's just harder. And it seems to me that the more critical information, the more independent debate, the more questioning, one is trying to grow a citizenry and civil society that is responsible and is healthy in its skepticism of everything, but you have these muddy and murky transitional periods. So I don't have an easy answer or formula, except generally I think it has to come more from bottom to top than it does top down. I think regulatory bodies, while well-intentioned, have many unintended consequences, and anything associated with government, even democratic government, has some inherent problems. So anything that is citizen-led, that is bottom-up, that is independent, that can be checked and verified is useful. But in transitional countries, arguably even more challenging than in developed democracies like the Czech Republic or European Union, other European Union countries of the United States.
Thank you. There's a question just here in the second. Oh, sorry, it's you. Yeah, okay, I didn't see that. Yeah, it's a...
Hi, I'm Ellen Hume. I'm a former journalist and teacher from America, but now living in Budapest at Central European University. And I hope you'll forgive me, but the two students are like my students, and I had to say something in response to them. Okay. Which is, to me, the critical feature that you're looking for is media literacy education early, and parents can give it to their children if your government is so oppressive that you can't have it in the schools. But it's helping you figure out what is true and what is false, and we're doing a panel on that this afternoon, actually tomorrow. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Is there another question? Oh, yeah.
Já si dovolím se zeptat česky. If I may, I'll ask in Czech. My name is Radomir Silver. I'm a political scientist. I would like to follow up on what has been said here about the slavery of the media. I think what the speaker had in mind my name is Silber. I'm a politologist. I would like to follow on what has been said here about the slavery of the media. And what she probably had in mind was the financial slavery, the dependence of the media. But of course, there is also political dependence on the state and on different groups. Speaking about the role of the media on the road to freedom, on the role of the media in emphasizing ethical aspects of this road to freedom, and speaking about responsibility, then I am afraid that especially in the Czech environment and maybe elsewhere, we very often feel that the media is describing the world and facts in a way and selecting information from the point of view of developed countries and are asking for the culture, ethics, and responsibility that we are capable of expressing are expressed in the same way by countries at a different stage of development, a lower stage of development, due to very often our own fault here in Europe. What is the role of media? What kind of example are they giving to these less developed, less free countries when the means which our governments use are, of course, more civilized? For instance, George Bush will order less torture than would be allowed by a more autocratic government in a less developed country. The United States, and we often hide behind the back of the United States, will order a humanitarian bombing which will have fewer civilian victims than traditional wars in which less developed countries engage in, using less worse quality weapons that we had sold them. Why should we impose higher ethical standards on those who are disadvantaged because of our own actions? Why do journalists not write critically of bombing a broadcasting station in a less developed country when journalists are killed there by our humanitarian bombs? And why do journalists not try to move our ethics higher than the methods used by autocrats? I think our media are selective. Our colleague here said that students accused him for working for a CIA broadcasting station. I have no doubt that his station provides truthful information, but what is more important is to set agendas and to select the information that will be provided. And how do media do that? Media that are financial slaves or political slaves of some other institution.
long question, mini speech and question about, I suppose, why Western media are selective and why we seem to have different ethical standards depending on which part of the world we are reporting on. I don't know who of you, yeah, Jeffrey, you might.
Well, there's a lot, so I won't respond to all of it. I don't think, I thought the questions you raised were reasonable, but I thought the picture you painted was incomplete and not very accurate, actually. First of all, imposing ethical standards, I don't think anybody's talking about imposing them. People are talking here about discussing them and debating them and encouraging them and adopting them, but I, for one, just want to say I'm not here to impose any ethical standards. In Western media, now you can go case by case, detail by detail, but you mentioned something about humanitarian interventions and bombings. And I know that I worked for a U.S. government-funded broadcaster, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and Gwen, we don't know each other, but we know each other by email and phone. We meet today for the first time, and you work for Voice of America. And I know for an absolute fact, anytime the United States made a mistake, including in bombings in places like Afghanistan, we reported it. Right? And Voice of America reports it. And The Economist magazine, which is not government-funded, reports it. And The Washington Post reports it. And The New York Times reports it. So the first thing I want to say is, I didn't think it was quite, I think it was maybe exaggeration for effect. I do that too, but not quite fair and not quite complete. But also, I just suggest that in free and democratic societies, where if it's your position and some of those who applauded you, that the media is selective, and of course the media is selective. You're selective. That's how you made that rhetorical point. You left a lot of stuff out to get applause. So of course the media is selective, but you have this great opportunity, I think, through competitive outlets, through the blogosphere, through Facebook, through Twitter, through grassroots groups, through unions, through protest outlets to challenge and you know, splash cold water on things and enter into the debate. So I think the questions are reasonable, but I just want to say, from my part, I thought it was sadly overstated the way you characterize things.
Thank you for this. I think we have time for one or two more questions, if there are any follow-up questions. There seems to be somebody. Okay, yeah.
Good afternoon. I just wanted to follow up with my question on the issue of the role of civil society in fact-checking, watchdog activities. As we speak, we see the activities of the Russian government very much suppressing civil society in doing such things by basically cutting on funding. And I think you may want to elaborate a little bit on this issue, because in almost every incremental new democracy, even in this country, we saw not necessarily restrictions on funding, obviously, in early stages of transition. There is not much, there are not terribly excessive funds available for funding civil society. But verbal suppression of civil society, no, we don't need it. We need a standard political party structure. But the role of civil society is clearly is undeniable, but it's also irreplaceable. Also, and maybe in particular in checking on politicians, what they say, what they do, but also what they say through media and on media. And maybe particularly in the Russian current context, we would like to elaborate on some of that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's a very good point you raised. We were meant to have a panelist on from Russia who unfortunately couldn't make it. So she would probably be the best person to comment on your point. But thank you for raising it. maybe one more question to, oh yeah, there's a gentleman over there.
Hi, my name is Viktor Pajo. I'm a member of the Czech Chamber of Deputies, and I was touched by the argument about shallow water journalism. Now, in Czech Republic, we have 10 million inhabitants. Just few of them buy serious newspapers. Most of them just go along with the tabloids, and that obviously makes big financial pressure on the newsrooms, on the edition houses. Now. An average Czech journalist, and now I will exaggerate a little bit, before lunch he writes about enlargement of the European Union, and after lunch he writes about the problems of the Roma community in Ostrava. Now, what is the way out of this? Should the edition houses connect and make bigger, financial, more stable entities that will allow their journalists to go in depth? And maybe this would go along with independent watchdog that would actually watch media watchdogs. That's what Ms. Vašáriová said before. Or is the way specialization of various media, there will be more of them and they will be specialized on various topics. What do you think is this way out of it? Because when I read all those serious newspapers in Czech Republic now, I see that they do adopt this internet hyperlink simplistic mentality, and it's not good for the society.
Thank you. I think that might be a question for Ingrid, who was also our first and last.
There was a time when let's say, freedom of expression, freedom of the media was measured by the number of dailies available in the country. And I think we have to figure out today that the number of dailies available is not really the relevant figure, because just having 100 dailies eventually that are not able to go and give more in-depth news, basically reporting on what agencies have been reported to them, covering the spots of the world that are relevant for the agencies and for a specific community, is not going to be a sustainable idea for a newspaper. So better have fewer, but financially more powerful. And this connects with the question that the lady before had risen. Journalists today are the more and more confronted with highly professionalized communication experts within the industries. And they themselves have to cover in the morning, as you say, some European issues, and maybe covering the opening of a school or the opening of a restaurant, and then go and have to comment on the bank accounts and how they're going to do. This is definitely something that readers maybe won't appreciate so much in the future, because the depth is missing. It is the superficiality that is not very much appreciated. And I think a more specialized way of covering it will be, at the end of the day, indispensable if you really want to have a future, a sustainable future. So therefore this whole concentration takes place, and therefore the business model questions are so relevant, because of course many newspapers, since there is not a lot of money, they have to work like that, but that is not going to be a sustainable model, I guess, in the future. So better have less, but have more specialized teams, which will gain the trust and also the confidence of the audience that if once they have spent the time to read it, that they really got something and an added value for what they have been contributing to the newspaper. But again, this is this very difficult process that is taking place now. And I think that is one of the reasons why newspapers lose so many readers all over the world. It is because the readers today, based on the input they have in the internet, simply sometimes know more than the journalists writing about it. And that is the problem, I think. And the other problem is definitely if you have a newspaper that is not, let's say, wealthy enough, they can't afford in training, providing training to the staff, providing the necessary specialization. And that makes the journalist an easy target for every professional PR company or communications department of an industry. And again, this is what readers the more and more start realizing, and that is basically one of the reasons why they probably go and look for more and other sources. And just I would like to add that this is the civil society, that is one thing, it's the professional specialization and the professional knowledge of the journalist that is only possible if he has a good profession and if he has specialized. The other thing, of course, is the influence of the governance or political parties or commercial parties that you also see when you look at newspapers and especially also television stations, especially television stations. And I think there, what has been mentioned before, it's the civil society that at the end of the day will make the difference. It needs to come out of the country itself by the civil society. What we see in the European Broadcasting Union, we see various problems when it comes to independence and impartiality. And it starts usually with the governance of the media, especially of the public service media. But again, media freedom is not only an issue for public service media. It's usually something that is somehow relevant for all the media, but public service media is, of course, especially in a special difficult situation. And there we see it in the governance structure, political interference, in the finance, in the financial contribution that very often are used to increase political influence by reducing finances, but also in the culture of the country and in the media itself. And I think that's probably the point where everything has to start, and that makes it so difficult, and that makes the transition lasting so long. And the civil society, at the end of the day, will make the difference.
Thank you very much, Ingrid, for this reply, and thank you to all my panelists. I thought you've done a wonderful job from very different perspectives, which I think made this panel especially interested. We had the managerial, the news website, practitioner, perspective from Romania, and then Jeffrey, who has a lot of experience in Eastern Europe and runs a think tank now. So thank you so much, and thank you to you all for your great questions.